So we'll kick it off with some introductions, Wendy, and then
kick.
All right.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to the AG5 webinar, eGestalt and Format sponsored webinar titled HIPAA Omnibus and Meaningful Use, How to Assess and Maintain Compliance.
Good morning, everyone.
Today's presenters are Anupam Sahai, that's me. I'm the co-founder and president of eGestalt Technologies, and I've had multiple, I've been in the area of healthcare IT, cloud computing, security and compliance for a number of years. Wendy, you want to give a bit of a background?
Yes, and my name is Wendy Whitmore. I'm the CIO and Chief Information Officer at formatapproved.com. We are an educational organization that addresses compliance and regulatory issues and important healthcare technology issues from an educational standpoint. I'm happy to be here today.
So before we get started with the webinar today, let's go through some logistics. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar for either Wendy or myself, please feel free to type it in the chat section or the questions section of the GoToWebinar tool that you have, and we will address it at the end of the webinar. And if you need a copy of the slides, please email me or Wendy for a copy, and we will be able to email it to you. A recorded version of the webinar will also be available for anybody who wants to review it again. And we have another session happening on March 20th in case you want to attend it again. So in terms of, yeah,
and Nupam, I just wanted to pipe up and say that on my side, my group will actually automatically outreach to the registration list in order to be able to provide them a link to the recorded session and access to the deck via a PDF folder. So we'll make sure that everybody gets that regardless.
Great. So in terms of the topics that we will cover today, it's right here. We will start out by talking about the changes that have been brought about by HIPAA Omnibus. This was enacted in January of 2013 and has been enforced since September 2013. And how does the HIPAA Omnibus affect medical providers, BAs, and subcontractors is also going to be covered today. And then we'll talk about meaningful use grants and what does it mean to do meaningful use analysis to get the federal grants. And we'll talk about best practices, any caveats that come with it in terms of when you're going through the HIPAA assessment process or when you're applying for meaningful use. So what are the real-world experiences that you want to look out for and adopt as part of your process is going to be mentioned here. And then we'll have some coverage on why the need for doing continuous monitoring and continuous compliance, because security and compliance is a journey. It's not a one-time thing that you do it and forget about it. So we'll talk about why is there a need to do it continuously. And then at the end, we'll talk about some of the automated tools for security and compliance management, which will help achieve HIPAA compliance and achieve meaningful use attestation, and how do you maintain your status from a HIPAA compliance and meaningful use perspective using the automation tool. And then we'll also talk about some of the training and remediation options that are required by HIPAA that is offered and is available out there. And at the end, we'll have Q&A to go through any questions that you might have. Before we begin, I just want to talk about some of the information presented here is meant for sharing, and it's not meant to be construed as legal advice. the regulations are subject to change and subject to multiple interpretations. And while we have taken all effort to ensure that the information is correct, please be advised that this should not be construed as legal information. So before we jump into the details of the HIPAA omnibus and what it entails, the basic definition of PHI is critical, because really what HIPAA omnibus is trying to do is it's trying to protect PHI, and PHI is a critical asset that HIPAA is trying to protect. And the reason this is critical is because PHI contains information about the individual, about the patient, that could be a name, it could be address, birth date, social security number. It could be related to the past, present, or future physical or mental health condition. It could be anything that can be interpreted and can be related to a particular individual that is considered to be protected by the HIPAA regulation. And HIPAA is all about best practices, best security practices that are required to ensure privacy and security of PHI information. And this could be in an electronic form, it could be in physical form. Any form of PHI information needs to be protected, period. So in terms of the summary of changes, there have been a number of changes that have been brought about by HIPAA Omnibus. And this has been the result of multi-year feedback that the HHS and the federal government had opened itself to. And some of the changes are essentially leading to better privacy and security of PHI information. So the key changes are that now, as per the HIPAA Omnibus regulation, not only covered entities but business associates are also under the scope of the law, which means they need to take steps to ensure privacy and security of PHI that's shared with them by the covered entity. And it could be a subcontractor associated with a covered entity, or it could be a subcontractor associated with a BA that is also responsible and liable. The sharing of PHI information is also tightened, has been limited greatly, and the individual now has complete rights and visibility and authority over how the information is shared externally beyond the covered entity. And the individual now has to co-opt into any sharing that takes place. So that's a huge change compared to what it was earlier, and that has some implications in terms of what does the covered entity and BA need to do to enforce this. And as a result of this individual's right to disclosure, the individual also needs to be provided access to information about who's sharing the information, with whom, and what information is being shared. So all that complete audit trail needs to be put in place. And that involves putting together new privacy practice notices. There's a need for putting together new business associate agreements, new policies, and new documentation that is required. There are new criminal penalties and new higher penalties that are put in place as a result of this HIPAA omnibus law. And these penalties are both civil and criminal. And the civil penalties can be as high as $1.5 million per incident, and with no upper limit. So it can easily stack up. And this is compared to $50,000 maximum fine that was the case before HIPAA omnibus came into effect. So you can see that there's a huge jump in liability and fines as a result of this new law. The other change is that HHS is now required by law to investigate if there's a breach or if there's a case of willful neglect. Willful neglect is the scenario where if a business is deemed to be compliant with HIPAA, which is every covered entity and BA, and if HHS comes to know of it, that they're not compliant, and not taking steps towards it. And they come to know about it because either a patient or a whistleblower or anybody else reports it, then they are required by law to investigate that particular entity. And so businesses are required to be prepared for audits if HHS knows about it. And if they don't take steps towards it, that's construed to be willful neglect. And there are some new changes to the breach notification rule that basically requires businesses to report to HHS of any breaches that happen. Earlier there was some restriction or some requirement that it was not required unless there was some level of harm deemed to be harm caused to the business. But right now the regulation is that if there's a breach, you report to HHS and do what you can to report it if possible. How does it impact the medical community, business associates, and those that work with the medical partners? So firstly, the big change is that now that not only the covered entities are responsible and liable to be HIPAA compliant, the business associates and subcontractors that they work with have a shared responsibility and shared liability for ensuring compliance. So medical providers also share the responsibility, and they need to take steps to ensure that the BAs and the subcontractors that they work with are following the law, are taking steps to ensure that they are HIPAA compliant, because otherwise CEs can be deemed to be willful, neglecting their responsibility. I talked about audits being done, and this audit could be done by the HHS, the Office of Civil Rights, which is an agency under HHS, or it could be done by state auditor generals, who are now empowered by the law to bring civil actions on behalf of the government. So it's basically part of the enforcement policy and the guideline that HIPAA Omnibus provides. I talked about the increased fines, which have now gone up to 1.5 million for civil violation. There are potential criminal liabilities as well in case businesses are found to be in willful neglect, or if they incorrectly attest for meaningful use dollars without doing anything. And we've had some incidents where CIOs have actually not taken any steps towards ensuring HIPAA compliance, and thereby have been criminally prosecuted. There are some incentive clauses built in, which basically the funding agency, the federal agencies, or the whistleblowers who are involved in reporting willful neglect, and if audited and if fined, the proceeds are used for funding the organizations, and it seems all the money that is received or retrieved as penalties can be used for funding the organizations that are enforcing HIPAA Omnibus. So this is part of the regulation law. And liability chain is in place, and covered entities and BAs have a shared responsibility. I talked about the data breach notification requirements. Right now, the requirement is that if a breach happens that involves more than 500 patient records, that needs to be reported to the government within 60 days of the breach happening. So as you can see,
and Chandi, I just wanted to chime in on this particular slide. ForMed works with a lot of business associate types, folks who work with the medical community for the purpose of assisting them with remediation products and services and helping them with IT support and that sort of thing. And one of the things I've noticed since the Omnibus regulation was passed, or update was passed, is that there's a lot of confusion about what the BAs are responsible for versus what the covered entities are responsible for. And essentially what you're saying here, and I think is very important to repeat, is that these all of these stipulations apply across the board now. And so if you are working with medical practices, if you're a consultant of any kind, and we'll talk a little bit about what all the different BA categories are, but if you're a BA or a vendor and you're working with the medical community, you are now, not only is it imperative from my perspective that the BAs are fully familiar with and aware of all of the HIPAA requirements and regulations. Of course, just simply to be a proper trusted advisor to the medical community. But in addition, I think it's important to note that you can be held liable for the same types of breaches if you're not advising the client correctly, if you're not, if you have access to the protected health information, and if you're not familiar with how that should be best protected. So, I just, from an education standpoint, because that's my, that's my spin, from an educational standpoint, I think it's very important for not only covered entities to be aware of HIPAA, which is a requirement of the HIPAA regulation, but for the BAs to be as knowledgeable as they can possibly be about this topic. So attending a webinar like this is a great step in the right direction, but very important to familiarize yourself with the details of this regulation.
Absolutely. So this is what Wendy was talking about earlier. The definition of BA is fairly broad, and anybody and everybody who touches PHI information is considered to be a BA. So an example of a business associate could be accountants, legal folks. It could be hosting providers, IT service providers. If you're an MSP offering services to a medical provider or a BA, you are considered to be a BA. Garbage collector, etc., etc. Anybody and everybody who touches PHI information either is involved in storing, accessing, or sharing of PHI information is considered to be BA. So as a part of the new HIPAA Omnibus law, and there are about 1.2 million plus business associates that are out there, they are now required by law to be HIPAA Omnibus compliant. So now let's change gears a little bit and talk about meaningful use, and why is meaningful use such a big deal and important thing. And this goes back to basically meaningful use is a way of doing security risk analysis for the business. And the reason why you want to do a risk analysis before you can get the full use dollars is that you're essentially security hardening your infrastructure. And you're security hardening the infrastructure to protect PHI information from being stolen. And it can be stolen either by external hackers, cyber attackers who are out to get the information, or it could be stolen by malicious insiders who are out to steal the information, or it could be accidental misuse. And you want to prevent all these scenarios from happening. So the reason to do risk analysis is to prevent security breaches and misuse of information. Not only that, if you get breached, there are multiple liabilities that come about, not to mention the fines that the HHS and others would impose on you. You are open to patient lawsuits because you're not supposed to lose the data. And it's been found through studies that an average cost of dealing with a security breach, which is to repair the breach and to deal with all the damages that come with it, is about 5.5 million. So that's a huge number. And that's basically the reason you want to do a security risk analysis, to know your risk exposure and to limit it so that you take steps towards fixing the problems that will lead to compromise of the PHI information. And from a HIPAA high-tech perspective, as I said, you want to minimize your liability and your risk exposure for losing the PHI information which the customers have entrusted with you. And not to mention that if you do the security risk analysis, and which is part of meaningful use analysis and meaningful use deposition attestation, you are also eligible for getting the federal grant dollars, which requires you to do security risk analysis. And the grant can vary anywhere between about $40,000 to $64,000 in total that the government has set aside to fund infrastructure upgrade, EMR adoption as part of high-tech and HIPAA omnibus. So there are multiple positive reasons to do the meaningful use analysis, to do the risk analysis so that you're eligible for the federal grant dollars. And if you look at other regulations, any business that's interested in security hardening wants to do a security risk analysis. And if you look at businesses such as anybody who does credit card transactions will have similar requirements coming from it. And risk management is a great way that you can justify spending the security and compliance dollars internally as well. Thereby, you can justify how spending some money on risk analysis or risk mitigation can solve some of the liability and risk concerns.
And I'd like to add, Anupam, that working in the industry from a consultant standpoint, what I see a lot in the medical community is some serious pushback on the need for the risk analysis. I think everybody recognizes now that in order to attest for meaningful use, in order to accomplish protection of your health information and in such a way that you will avoid any kind of potential breach, these things are very important, but a lot of medical community folks have communicated to my consultants and to us that they feel like if they plug their ears and close their eyes and hope that they don't receive an audit, they think they can get away with just not bothering to do this risk analysis piece. But one of the recent stories about the dermatology practice that was fined $150,000, they made a point when they assessed the fine. They made a point of saying that one of the reasons that they did fine at that level was because the practice did not identify the potential breach in using a risk analysis. And again, I think yes, it's a bitter pill. Does anybody really want to have to spend extra money to do these kinds of paperwork? What many practices will deem regulatory bitter pill. Is it necessary? Yes. Is it required? Yes. So all of those things are true. Simply not filing your taxes doesn't mean that you don't have taxes due. And I think as an analogy, we use that quite often. And hopefully the fact that we're seeing more and more people on some of these educational sessions means that they're starting to understand how important these steps are. But risk analysis is really one of those base level, very important steps that all practices need to take.
Yeah, so from a meaningful use assessment perspective, what does the risk analysis entail? And the basic premise here is that all the assets that are involved in PHI handling, PHI storage, PHI access or transmission, it could be a workstation, it could be a desktop, it could be a laptop, it could be a server having all the patient records. All those PHI assets need to be involved and included in the risk analysis process. So what does risk analysis mean? It basically means that you need to enumerate all the PHI assets and then identify for those asset types what are the various ways and means that those assets can be compromised. And so those are vulnerabilities and threats. And threats are really user-initiated or a robot-initiated or a machine-initiated attack. And you want to be able to list out all the possible ways the system can be compromised, the PHI asset can be compromised, which in turn means that the PHI asset sitting on those machines, hardware, software can be taken advantage of, can be stolen. And once you have that, then you're essentially looking for what are the systems in place, what are the controls in place that are preventing such misuse of data, preventing attackers or malicious insiders from stealing the data. And once you have that, then you kind of look at the likelihood and the impact of the data being stolen, which basically all of this is needed to come up with a risk score. So essentially, you're looking at all the PHI assets, looking at all the threats and vulnerabilities that are affecting that particular asset, and what kind of security controls that you have in place today, and then look at the likelihood of such attacks from happening and the impact of these attacks from taking place. So all of these factors are taken into account to come up with a risk exposure for the business, for anybody to steal the PHI information. Now, once you have the risk code, you have a sense of what's the current, what are the set of weaknesses and how risk-prone is the business for anybody to break in. If you have lots of systems that have not been patched, that have outdated software, and that are known to have compromised, that can be easily compromised by malware or by hacking in, then clearly that's not a good situation to be in. So the risk analysis will help you determine all those weak links in your business for the PHI assets, and then allow you to come up with risk exposure. And then a result of the security analysis is that once you find the gaps in terms of holes in security that's in the business, then you go about fixing them and putting together controls that minimizes the risk exposure. So the risk analysis is automation of all this that I talked about using very simple, and there are lots of automation tools out there. If you try to do this manually, you might spend weeks and months trying to get this done. And the good news is that it might seem like a daunting task, but we'll talk about some tools that are out there, and in particular one tool that will help you automate this entire process very easily with the click of a button. So meaningful use and audit programs, we get asked this question a lot in terms of, what is the OCR looking for, Office of Civil Rights looking for? What is HHS looking for when they're trying to do an audit? And as you might have heard and read in the press, the HHS is starting to roll out an audit program in 2014. They had done a trial program in 2012 where they had randomly selected, this was a pilot program, so they had randomly selected, I believe, 125 organizations to do a random audit. But in 2014, they are launching a full-blown HIPAA audit program. And so what is that HHS will look for when they audit a particular business? So here is what they're looking for, and this is again coming from HHS and Office of Civil Rights. That's the enforcement agency. So they're looking for some basic guidelines and requirements of HIPAA omnibus to be met. They're looking for the privacy rule, which is part of HIPAA, where you are essentially ensuring and safeguarding of privacy and safeguarding of PHI information that a medical provider or a business associate is handling. They're looking for certain security rules, guidelines to be implemented as well. And security rule here means steps taken by the business to ensure protection and security of PHI information. And so the combination of privacy and security rules are the centerpiece of what HIPAA Omnibus is. And the HHS is certainly looking at what's the efficacy of the privacy and security rule implementation-wise that the businesses have put in place. They're also looking at breach notification. Is the business do the businesses have policies to ensure that if a breach happens, that the reporting includes the HHS, the patients, and everybody else who needs to be informed? So the breach notification rule is a new one, and then risk analysis is a big item. When HHS and OCR did this pilot program in 2012, they found a huge number of organizations hadn't done the risk analysis, and that's a big red check mark, because risk analysis is a critical step towards getting HIPAA compliant, and not to mention if you're getting the federal grant dollars, meaningful use dollars, this is a complete requirement.
And Chadi, Anupam, I'm going to say the other piece is that that if you don't do the meaningful use risk analysis, if you don't have a risk analysis report, that what Anupam was mentioning before, the statement of willful neglect, that is the big red check mark, and that was a good way to put it, Anupam, is that when they are doing these audits and looking for egregious willful neglect, not having that risk analysis is a high-level component of that.
Absolutely. So as a business, what can you do with it to deal with all these different issues that we talked about? We talked about all the HIPAA omnibus requirements. How does it affect businesses, whether you're a covered entity or a BA or a subcontractor working with the medical community? And you have to do risk analysis. You have to take care of the entire HIPAA omnibus requirements, including the security risk analysis. So from an organizational point of view, there are some key steps that needs to be taken by every medical provider and BAs. The first thing is to clearly understand what are the implications of HIPAA omnibus, and we covered a lot of them today at a high level, but there are a lot of details that follow there. But at a high level, if you understand the details that we talked about, that's a great start. The second thing is that now the next step is to put together and take steps to put together a security and compliance plan so that you are moving towards compliance. And the first step towards moving towards compliance is to make sure that your organization is ready internally to deal with the various compliance issues that are found, and so that means assigning roles, training employees to know and understand what their responsibilities are, and holding them accountable. And some of this includes putting together policies and procedures, putting together some guidelines on what are the do's and don'ts, and all that is part of training and information sharing within the organization. And the first step towards moving towards getting to be compliant is to understand where you stand today. And the first step is to understand that by doing a self-assessment. And self-assessment is really establishing a baseline that gives you a sort of gap, gives you a gap report, which is really the missing pieces that you do not have today as a business. So doing the self-assessment gives you the gap report, and then you also need to understand all the PHI assets that are there in the business, either internally or maybe there's a firewall that's transmitting EMR information, etc. So all the PHI assets and how vulnerable are they? That is an important step to understand how easily can the systems be compromised. And then to really put a risk exposure, you need to do a security risk analysis. So all of this is part of a baseline creation that you're doing. You're trying to assess the gaps, you're trying to do vulnerability analysis, and you're trying to do a risk analysis. So once you have that, then you have essentially a good view of what is missing, or what are the gaps today. Once you have the gap, then the next step is to fix the problems that are found. And to fix the problems means that you implement and remediate the gaps that are found, which means that you need to put together some new controls, new policies, new procedures, patch the systems, maybe put access control policies in place as to who should be touching which data. Not everybody should see all the patient information. And how you work with the external vendors is part of the policies and procedures that you need to put in place. So all the things that I talked about in terms of what a covered entity needs to do internally to train their employees, to communicate the best practices, but not only that, they need to also affect how they integrate and share and collaborate with any external vendors, whether it's VA and subcontractors. And all of that is part of the policy and procedure and agreements that need to be put in place once you know the gaps that are existing today. And this is part of the overall set of steps that an organization needs to put in place. And once you have that, then you have a proof of compliance, which is a report on compliance that then generate, which shows all the steps that you've taken as a business towards meeting the HIPAA omnibus requirements. And once you have this, then this is a good first step, and you are compliant for the time being, and then you need to repeat this on a frequent basis. Depending on how quickly things change in the organization, you might want to repeat this every 3 months, every 6 months. And again, the idea is to list down at a high level what the different items are, and if you do this manually, it's a big effort. So automation will help greatly here. So as I said, security and compliance is a journey, and by taking the steps that I've outlined in the last slide, you get to a point where you're compliant in a particular point in time. But it's not enough to be compliant or secure at a particular point, because threats are evolving, new vulnerabilities appear pretty much every day, and your assets that you might have patched a week ago could be out of date. So typically you want to monitor the infrastructure, monitor your risk score, monitor your compliance status on a regular basis. As I said earlier, this could be because your compliance or a security or a risk posture could change and evolve. And this could be because people are leaving the organization or joining the organization, new assets and new threats come about, and all of this could lead to new compromises, new risk exposure that happens on a daily basis. So it's important to monitor your posture, maintain it through, again, all the steps that I talked about. So what does it mean to maintain and continuously monitor the compliance status, and what are the key elements that are involved that need to be monitored? So if you've done, let's say, 100 things towards meeting HIPAA omnibus compliance, I'm just taking an example, there are few things that need to be repeated and monitored continuously. So you want to do the risk analysis on a frequent basis, so that as new threats evolve, as new assets come into the organization, as new employees come in, you are monitoring the risk exposure and limiting the liability. You want to monitor your compliance status and make sure that your policy documents are updated regularly. And then as new employees come in, you want to train them, make them aware of what the new regulations are. They may or may not have a HIPAA omnibus background. So it's important to have these training sessions with the employees, the new employees, to ensure that they are familiar with what it entails, what are the responsibilities, and what are their duties towards meeting and contributing towards business compliance for HIPAA. So we talked about a lot of things from a HIPAA omnibus perspective, responsibilities and things that need to be done. We talked about security risk analysis, and all of this might seem a daunting task. And if you do it manually, yes, it can take weeks and months and can be pretty daunting and very expensive. But we want to talk about a couple of tools that help with security and compliance monitoring and for training. And this makes your life simpler, we believe, in terms of how to assess HIPAA compliance and how to maintain it, also how to do security risk analysis. There are very sophisticated tools out there. So AG5 is a tool that helps you monitor your security, monitor your compliance requirements, and it will automate the whole process of getting a baseline report done and then to continuously monitor if changes happen and recommend how to fix the problems that are found. There's support for HIPAA high-tech built into the tool. There is a vulnerability scanning solution, security scanning solution built into the tool, and there's the risk exposure, risk analysis and risk exposure capability in the solution as well. So from a HIPAA perspective, all the things that we talked about, that if you're looking to understand your HIPAA compliance posture, if you're trying to understand the PHI assets vulnerabilities, and you're trying to understand the risk exposure, all those capabilities are in the tool called AG5, and you're able to automate the whole process by leveraging the tool. And it's got automation and knowledge base available. It comes built in with policy documents, contracts, excuse me, it comes built in with policies, agreements, and contracts that's templatized, so you can leverage the templates that are existing in the tool to customize it and adopt it to your business needs. So it's built into the tool, and it's subscription based. It's available to anybody who subscribes to it, and it's got integration with the compliance training tool that you'll hear about as well. So from a HIPAA training perspective, HIPAA certification perspective, there are a lot of options that we'll talk about that can get your internal employees trained. And not only that, if you have service providers who are interested in offering this service, they can use the training and the tool for offering managed services as well for both security, compliance, and training related services. So from an internal employee perspective or a service provider perspective, what the tool does is it provides complete automation for dealing with all security and compliance issues. So if you're worried about HIPAA compliance issues and how to go about understanding where you stand today, how things are changing, all of that is automated by the tool. And end customers have a real-time view to their security and compliance posture. If things are changing, if there are vulnerabilities that are found, they will be able to see that in real time. And as a service provider, you will also have a window into what the customer is seeing in real time. So there is a complete collaboration possible between the service provider and the customer to offer these managed services. And the support professional here could be an internal employee of a large hospital, the IT manager or the compliance manager. So they can leverage the tool to offer and manage their infrastructure as well. So this is all software based, so you don't have to install any hardware. All of this is possible because of the cloud-based deployment model that is supported by the tool. And as far as HIPAA Omnibus is concerned, as I mentioned earlier, the new requirement is that not only covered entities, but business associates and vendors need to be compliant. So the tool will help you not only become compliant yourself, but if you're worried about other BAs and vendors who need to be compliant, the tool will help you automate that process as well. And as a covered entity, as a service provider, you have complete visibility, real-time visibility into what the current security and compliance posture is for any vendors and BAs. So I won't spend too much time on this, but suffice it to say that the automation that is supported by the tool is very comprehensive. Typically you want to start out by doing a baselining of your current infrastructure as to where do you stand today with respect to the HIPAA Omnibus requirements, and that typically involves doing a self-assessment, maybe a security scan, and a risk assessment. Once you know that, you understand what are the current gaps that exist today in terms of meeting or the shortfalls that stop you from meeting the HIPAA Omnibus requirements and the security risk requirements. So once you have the gap reports, the next step is to put together a remediation plan to fix the problems that are found. And again, the tool will guide you through all the steps that are required to get there. It will tell you what are the remediation steps that you need to put in place. If there are training that needs to be provided to the employees, you can click on the tool and it recommends a set of training courses that your employees need to take. If there's a need for putting together a new business associate agreement, then the tool will also give you templates that you can customize and adopt. There are best practices in the tool that tell you what other businesses do when they face such a gap, or what are the guidelines from the best practices from other standard bodies like NIST and ISO. So you've got all the information that you need to go about fixing the gaps that are found by aligning yourself with the best practices and the industry standards that are out there. So all that knowledge base is available in the tool, and then you go back and do the evaluation of your current security and compliance posture. If you fix the gaps, then you're good for now, and you can repeat all of this and schedule repetitions of this cycle, as it were, based on a schedule that you decide. So the complete automation of this baselining process, fixing the problems that are found, and then repeating the cycle is automated by the tool. And the tool is very sophisticated in terms of understanding your business-specific needs and assets that are there, so that all these responses are tailored to your particular scenario. And the number of dashboards and reports that are available that tell you your compliance gaps and your remediation help that is needed for both compliance, security, and vulnerabilities that are found. And you can generate a meaningful use report that will also guide you through the steps of becoming and getting the federal grant dollars and becoming moderate your risk and controlling your risk exposure. This is what the dashboard looks like. As I said, if you're a customer, if you're a business looking, you can get a real-time security and compliance posture view of your infrastructure, of your business. It tells you how many assets were found, and what degree of criticality. It tells you your overall security risk, your compliance risk. And then if you want to download a free community edition version of the tool, you can go to egestalt.com and try it out yourself before you're convinced to buy something like this. You can try out the scanning solution. It'll tell you in maybe 30 minutes to 45 minutes where you stand today at a high level. So it's a diagnostic tool that you can download. There's also a managed services dashboard that's available to any service provider who's interested in offering this solution. As a service provider, as I said earlier, it's a managed services platform for you that you can then use to offer managed services to your customers. And as a managed services provider, you have complete visibility and control over what your customers are doing, and you can remotely work and collaborate with your customers to get the whole services done and accomplished remotely. I want to just show you some screenshots before we move it over to training. It's basically very simple yes or no questions that are asked to you as you go through the assessment process. There are lots of help available in terms of document repository. There is policy documents available. There are this is the policy document that's available, and there are agreements and contracts that are built into the tool, which are available with the click of a button, and you can customize this and adopt it. And then there are best practices that are available based on what other industry leaders are doing and what standard bodies are recommending. All of this is built into the tool so that you don't have to ask any other domain expert. It makes you the domain expert for that particular requirement. And it tells you all the security vulnerabilities that exist, what are the gaps, and how to fix the problem. So if there are patches needed, if there are things missing, then you are able to do that very easily. And then you can generate reports that are able to give you all the guidance that you need from a security gap perspective, compliance gap perspective, and we tell you not only what the problems that are there, that you're non-compliant here, but also tell you how to solve the problem. So it tells you what are the things you need to do to put in place to get to compliant status. So Wendy, you want to talk about the training here? Wendy, you there?
Sorry, just unmuted myself. Sorry about that, Anupam. Actually, yes, I would love to talk about the training aspect and the partnership. Is everybody able to hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that, guys. Yes, in fact, I was just responding to a question in the audience about training, and the question is one that we receive frequently, which is about what the requirements are for training and what the guidelines are from HHS for training, and so curiously, you know, as we are an education company and a course development company around topics of compliance, we find that we are constantly seeking answers to those questions so that we make sure that we are providing all of the itinerant and relevant information that our students need to know about these various topics. But curiously, although HHS has a lot of information on their website, they have not created any kind of identified syllabus for their training. So we have done our best to utilize their guidelines to put together and develop what we feel is the most comprehensive online self-paced training for HIPAA from two different levels. We provide training that is at the compliance officer level, which is a much more in-depth training in the privacy and security regulations. We also include business associate agreement templates and things like that in that level of training. And then we also have staff level training, workforce level training, much shorter, much quicker, but able to be delivered online and able to be managed by the compliance officer so that you can oversee the training of the staff. So we partnered with eGestalt as a way to make sure that folks who are looking to automate their privacy and security aspects of their practice can do so all in one spot. So as Anupam has been sharing with you, there are tools that they have developed that help you to automate compliance, create the reports, identify gaps, and get all of the information that you need on a continuous basis around your security posture. What we have done is we've added to that, and if you are looking at the slide here, you'll see the toolbar for the eGestalt tool there at the top with a button that allows access to all of our compliance training titles. So HIPAA, of course, is a very important one that is attached to the eGestalt tool. That is probably the most important training that we've embedded into the compliance product for this purpose. But then we also have some very unique titles that are relevant to compliance that have been very helpful to the eGestalt continuous dashboard training folks, and that includes our Meaningful Use course. That we do have a training that is specifically targeted at the Meaningful Use program, so that the person who takes that course can understand at a very deep level how to attest for meaningful use. It has action plans in it, lots of good information around the MU programs, and as each part of the Meaningful Use program rolls out, we update that course as well. Everybody who signs up for training through the tool for HIPAA or for Meaningful Use has access to that training for a full year, so that license lasts for an entire year, and our training has a lot of benefits, and that was one of the reasons that we partnered with eGestalt, was to be able to provide a lot of this compliance education. The reason that people take our training is because it can obviously facilitate the compliance. It can help mitigate audit risk by training your workforce, which is a requirement of HIPAA. It updates learning on things like ICD-10. It provides job training, so it can be a benefit to your employees. We also have CEUs for nurses and coders from AHIMA and ANCC. And it adds value to employees' training programs, because we do provide college credit associated with all the courses as well. All of our courses have been developed by leading HIT, EHR, HIM security professionals. They've all been reviewed and approved by healthcare technology industry leaders. So with the question about HHS, we do follow very strict HHS guidelines around our HIPAA workforce training, as well as our HIPAA compliance officer level trainings. And all of it is provided completely online, so the minute you select a course and you start, you can come in and out of the course, start, stop, engage with the quizzes and exams, all online and all at your own pace. And if you want to jump the slide, Anupam, how we present the material is in such a way as our students are able to come in and out, start and stop, and still retain the information in our training. We call it the 10-10-10 method. It gives you a quick 10-minute read followed by a 10-minute audio-video narration, followed by a 10-question quiz. Each one of the courses runs anywhere from 10 to 20 modules. The HIPAA Compliance Officer course, for instance, is going to run about 12 modules. You go through those 10-minute modules, and at the end, you're awarded a certificate or certification based on the level of the course, CEUs, if those are applicable to your career, and the most important piece, of course, is that you've met that requirement. So many times in those risk analysis reports, one of the main missing pieces in terms of that gap report will be that the staff has not been trained, or that the training has not been updated since the omnibus regulation change, or since the new meaningful use regulation changes. And so those training updates are very, very important to the staff. So thank you, Anupam. I very much appreciate having an opportunity to talk about the training programs. And so in answer to the audience member about that following guidelines, certainly if you can attach yourself or attend an education program that you can be guaranteed is following those guidelines, that of course is the easiest way to get that training done. But I'm also going to send out links for ways to find out what those requirements are.
Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, so in closing, what we would say is that, HIPAA Omnibus might seem to have a lot of changes and it might seem a little daunting in the beginning, but there are automation tools out there like Agify that will help you solve all the problems that you might have otherwise, and it takes care of all the moving parts of HIPAA Omnibus. And if you're interested in getting the meaningful use dollars, you need to do risk assessment, and Agify will help you do that as well. And as part of HIPAA Omnibus remediation or preparation, there are training courses available, like Wendy talked about, that's available through the Format store and through the Agify tool as well, so that based on the role of the person who's doing the compliance or who's participating in the compliance, the specific training courses will be recommended to you, so that you have very easy way of choosing the right course and then accessing them by the click of a button. So if you are interested in learning more, please reach out to me or Wendy. I have the contact information here. Feel free to reach out to either of us, and then you have the contact information here for both Wendy and myself. And let's see whether we have any time for any questions. If we do not have time today, we will respond to you via email. I suspect we have about 2 minutes, so actually we don't. So what we'll do is we will come back to you and respond to you via email and answer any questions that you might have. I sincerely apologize for not being able to answer any questions today, but we will get to it shortly. So, Wendy,
yeah, so thanks very much for everyone for attending today. And Anupam, I'm happy to take questions after the fact. I certainly will address any that are in the question or chat box and send them directly to the folks submitting the questions, but also feel free to use my email address to ask any other questions about our training program at formatapproved.com.
And I would like to thank you all for coming as well, and thank you for attending and joining the webinar today. And we will have the recording of the webinar available to you after the session today. And we have a follow-up webinar on the 20th of March. So if you want to ask any questions or just review the material again, feel free to join us then. So thank you again today. Have a great day, and talk to you soon. Bye.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call